The void was a cold, indifferent canvas, stretched taut and infinite, a testament to the unyielding vastness of a galaxy that cared little for the travails of mortal beings. Within its obsidian depths, amidst the swirling dust lanes of the segmentum pacificus, where the light of the Astronomicon barely pierced the nebulae, Kinhold Ur-Kadrin carved its grim existence. Renowned across the few kinholds that knew of their name, Ur-Kadrin was a lineage steeped in the art of the deep maw, the perilous, relentless extraction of wealth from the most hostile and remote celestial bodies. Their reputation was built on grit, an unwavering commitment to the book of grudges, and technology that could chew through the heart of a dead star. For cycles, the Golgoth mining fleet, the jewel in Ur-Kadrin's industrial crown, had delved into the forgotten corners of the galactic rim. Its vessels, vast and utilitarian, were forged for endurance rather than grace. Reinforced prows of adamantium, laser arrays capable of vaporizing continental masses, and void shields that could shrug off solar flares. Each ship was a self-contained ecosystem, a testament to the kin's ingenuity and their refusal to yield to the void's relentless entropy. Aboard these leviathans of industry, tens of thousands of kin, from the stoic hearthkin to the ever-tinkering Brokir iron masters, performed their duties with grim precision, guided by the cold, calculated wisdom of their ancestor, Kor, Ur-Kadrin's heart. The Golgoth's current objective was a geological anomaly catalogued as Leviathan's rib. This wasn't merely a large asteroid. It was a behemoth, a void whale-sized titan of rock and ice, easily matching a small moon in mass and dwarfing most imperial void fortresses. Its trajectory had brought it through a pocket of warp-infused ether long ago, leaving behind a faint, lingering energy signature that tantalized the Golgoth's advanced geoscanners. The readings were unlike anything the kin had encountered, a complex, fluctuating signal that hinted at immense, untapped energies and mineral wealth beyond estimation, perhaps even Xenos relics of forgotten civilizations. To the kin, this was not merely a rock. It was a promise, a challenge, and potentially a new chapter in the ledger of their ancestor core. Kal Tharn, the expeditionary commander of the Golgoth fleet, watched the holographic projections of the Leviathan rib in his command center. His face, etched with the scars of 100 void skirmishes and the wisdom of countless mining cycles, reflected the muted anticipation of his kin. Around him, the low hum of machinery provided a constant thrum, a mechanical heartbeat against the oppressive silence of the void outside. Brokir iron masters, their augmetic limbs whirring softly analyzed streams of data that flowed across dozens of illuminated displays. Hearthkin warriors, their sturdy frames encased in powered armor, moved with a practiced ease through the ship's corridors, preparing the heavy drilling apparatus. "The readings remain stable, Kal," reported Brokir Imgar, his voice a low growl from beneath his rebreather, his multi-limbed manipulator tapping at a console. "Deep scan penetrations suggest a core of unprecedented density, layered with trace elements that defy our standard classifications. No known geological analogs." Tharn grunted, his gaze fixed on the anomaly's pulsing signature at the asteroid's heart. "And the energy output? Still fluctuating, I trust?" "Indeed, Kal. A subtle oscillation, almost imperceptible. Yet it influences local space-time distortions at a Planckian level. Our grav generators have had to compensate for anomalous micro-shifts in mass distribution." Imgar paused, his augmetic eye blinking in thought. It is as if the very fabric of reality within the asteroid's core is breathing. A shiver, imperceptible to an outsider, ran down Tharn's spine. The kin, pragmatic and hard-nosed, rarely indulged in such poetic descriptors. For an Iron Master to speak of a celestial body breathing was unsettling. Ur-Kadrin's heart, the ancestor core, had transmitted its own preliminary analysis, a vast stream of data that was comprehensive, yet carried an unusual subfrequency. The Votan's usually unflappable logic seemed to wrestle with the data, presenting probabilities that were both alluring and deeply concerning. It suggested immense riches, yes, but also a statistical anomaly of risk that the Votan rarely flagged with such emphasis. "Proceed with caution, Brokir," Tharn finally commanded, his voice firm, echoing the weight of countless ancestral oaths. "Deploy the deep maw drills. Initiate slow-bore protocols. We peel this beast layer by layer, with an eye for any deviations from the norm, and maintain a full-spectrum sensor net, no matter how much void static it generates." The deep maw drills were engineering marvels, kinetic impactors reinforced with molecular-bound plasteel, capable of punching through several kilometers of solid rock per cycle. They were designed to harvest, not to investigate. But Kal Tharn knew this expedition was different. The ancestor core's warnings, subtle as they were, resonated with the ancient wisdom enshrined in the Book of Grudges. When the void shows you a path too easy, there is often a precipice unseen. The Golgoth positioned itself, dwarfing the Leviathan's rib with its sheer bulk. Massive grav claws extended, locking onto the asteroid's irregular surface, anchoring the fleet. From the belly of the flagship, the colossal drill heads extended, glowing with contained energy, their maws yawning open towards the void whale's side. The silent ballet of industry began. Drill ships, like tireless scarabs, swarmed the chosen quadrant, their bore lasers lancing out, incising perfect circles into the asteroid's crust. Heavy tractor beams guided away the expelled rock and dust, funneling it into automated refineries that would begin the process of mineral extraction. Hours bled into days, days into cycles. The drills bored deeper, kilometers turning into tens of kilometers. The rock yielded, but with a stubbornness that hinted at its unusual composition. Xenos-infused elements, strange crystalline structures, and pockets of vacuum within the asteroid's core were encountered, slowing progress. Each new discovery, however, only fueled the kin's resolve. The Votan's data, though tinged with its unusual sub-frequency, continued to point to a central core of unparalleled value. The potential for the greatest haul in Ur-Kadrin's history was a powerful motivator, overriding the subtle unease that had begun to spread among the more superstitious Hearthkin. During a routine data upload from the advanced geoprobes, a flicker occurred. Not a malfunction, but a profound, instantaneous spike across all sensor frequencies, followed by a momentary, complete cessation of all external readings from the probe, only to restart a microsecond later with data that was perfectly normal, almost suspiciously so. "Carl, did you see that?" Hearthkin Urist, a scanner specialist, exclaimed, his voice tight with surprise. Geoprobe Delta 7 just went dark for less than a breath, then rebooted with a full report. But the anomaly, it surged. Tharn, who had felt a faint, almost subliminal thrum in his bones, turned sharply. Cross-reference with Gamma 9. Was there a similar spike? Brokhire Imgar was already on it. Affirmative, Kal. Gamma 9 registered a nearly identical synchronous event. A wave of something. It propagated through the asteroid's core faster than light, and then simply vanished. Our internal chronometers didn't even catch it. Votan analysis, Tharn demanded, his gaze now fixed on the depths of the void whale, a prickle of alarm rising within him. Ur-Kadrin's heart, after a noticeable delay, responded, its voice usually a calm, synthesized baritone, now with a faint, almost imperceptible distortion. Anomaly registered, statistical probability of geological stress fracture. Probability of sensor malfunction, 0.00%. Probability of unknown Xenos influence. Rising. The last words hung in the air, cold and stark. The Votan rarely admitted to unknown anything. For it to utter such a phrase, and with that subtle crackle in its normally perfect vocalization, suggested something truly out of the ordinary. The low hum of the Golgoth fleet seemed to deepen. The void outside suddenly colder, more watchful. The Leviathan's rib, once merely a prize, now felt like something else entirely. Something ancient. Something patient. The drills continued, boring ever closer to the heart of the anomaly. The kin were, above all else, diligent. But Tharn, watching the ceaseless toil, felt a burgeoning dread. The vast wealth promised by the Votan now seemed a secondary concern. Something was stirring beneath the immense mass of the Leviathan's rib, something that had been dormant for epochs, and Kinhold Ur-Kadrin was about to disturb its slumber. The deep maw drills groaned, their adamantium teeth grinding against rock that grew increasingly obdurate, almost unnaturally resilient. The kin had bored through hundreds of kilometers of exotic minerals, some glowing with faint, residual radiation, others humming with inert, psychic energy. The asteroid's internal pressure had risen exponentially, necessitating constant adjustments to the mining vessel's structural integrity fields and grav compensators. Broke-hire iron masters, their faces smudged with grease and void dust, worked tirelessly, their augmetic limbs a blur of focused activity, maintaining the delicate balance between maximum excavation speed and structural stability. The constant whine of power conduits and the rhythmic thud of kinetic impacts became the oppressive soundtrack to their existence. Kal Tharn stood on the bridge of the Golgoth Prime, the flagship, his gaze fixed on the main holographic display that showed a real-time representation of their progress. The anomaly, a pulsing heart of crimson light, was now less than a kilometer away. Surrounding it, the asteroid's density readings spiked to astronomical levels, far beyond any known terrestrial or stellar core. It was less like rock and more like solidified oblivion, a primordial substance woven into the fabric of the void itself. The air on the bridge, normally regulated to perfection, felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Even the kin, stoic and unflappable as they were, exchanged nervous glances. Their Votan, Ur-Kadrin's heart, was transmitting data at an unprecedented rate, but the sub-frequency distortion had grown more pronounced, almost a low, dissonant hum beneath its computational pronouncements. Votan, status report on core composition, Tharn commanded, his voice a gravelly rumble. The ancestor, core responded, its voice now tinged with an almost imperceptible, cold metallic echo. Analysis of core strata indicates a non-baryonic mass with exotic matter properties, crystalline lattice structures of unknown composition, density approaching neutronium levels, high probability of contained energy matrix. Recommend extreme caution. Energy signature at critical thresholds. Critical thresholds? What does that mean, Votan? Tharn pressed, a knot tightening in his gut. The Votan rarely used such alarmist terminology. Data insufficient for precise categorization. Probability of catastrophic energy release increasing. The ancestor core's response was glacially slow, punctuated by strange, minute crackles that sounded almost like static discharge within its very lexicon. Suddenly, a cacophony of alarms blared across the bridge. Kal, drill ship, Iron Hand 6, just lost all primary power, yelled a sensor operator. Secondary systems failing. Life support dropping. Before Tharn could react, another voice, shrill with panic, cut across the comms. It wasn't a malfunction. It was sucked dry. The energy just left the ship. The drills, they just stopped. All forces, retract drills, full power to void shields, Tharn bellowed, his fist slamming onto his console. Get damage control to Iron Hand 6 now. But even as he spoke, he knew it was likely too late. The Iron Hand 6, a vessel designed to withstand stellar flares, was now a dead hulk, drifting listlessly, its internal lights extinguished, a tomb in the making. The speed of its collapse was terrifying. Then, a new reading flooded the display. A massive, focused energy surge emanating from the core, unlike anything previously detected. It was not destructive, not kinetic, but rather a wave of pure, cold force that seemed to press against the very integrity of the other drill ships. Instruments flickered, comms sputtered, and the internal lighting on the Golgoth Prime dimmed for a heart-stopping moment. The core. It's reacting, Imgar exclaimed, his augmetic eyes wide, scanning frantically across the suddenly erratic readouts. It's not an explosion, Kal. It's a pulse, a cold pulse. Just as the chaos threatened to overwhelm them, a single, piercing alert cut through the din. Kal, main bore of Golgoth Prime. We've made contact. Breach confirmed. Tharn ignored the dying, Iron Hand Sichi for a moment. His attention snapped to the main screen. The holographic projection shifted, displaying a camera feed from the colossal primary drill. The feed was distorted, filled with shimmering static, but through it, a spectacle of terrifying beauty unfolded. The drill had punched through the final layer of what appeared to be obsidian black rock, cracking it like fragile glass. Beyond the breach, not the anticipated gush of exotic gases or the cascade of valuable ores, but a cavern of pure, crystalline light. It was immense, a cathedral-like void carved within the asteroid's heart, its walls shimmering with facets that reflected an unnatural emerald luminescence. The floor, ceiling, and supporting pillars were composed of a crystalline substance unlike any ever catalogued by the kin, appearing simultaneously solid and ethereal, absorbing light, yet radiating its own silent glow. The air within the chamber, seen through the distorting lens of the camera, seemed to writhe, filled with phantom eddies of pure energy. And then, in the absolute center of this impossible vault, hovering without support, was the source of all the disturbance, the genesis of the anomaly. It was a shard, a single, perfectly geometric fragment of something that defied comprehension. It was obsidian black, smooth as polished glass, yet absorbing and emitting light simultaneously, like a fragment of crystallized night sky studded with captured stars. It was not large, perhaps only the size of a kin's forearm, but it pulsed. A slow, rhythmic throb of cold, silent light, radiating an aura that seemed to drink the warmth from the very atoms around it. It was alien. Utterly, profoundly alien. The camera feed from the drill bore crackled once more, then froze. The image of the pulsing shard burned into the display. All comms from the deep maw section went dead. A chilling silence descended upon the Golgoth Prime's bridge, broken only by the mournful hiss of minor system failures and the rapid, shallow breathing of the kin. "What in the void's name is that?" murmured a hearthkin, his voice barely a whisper. Tharn felt it then. A presence. It wasn't a sound nor a visual manifestation, but a cold, insidious thought that seemed to brush against the edges of his mind. Not a voice, but a suggestion of absolute indifference, of ancient, terrible power. It felt like being observed by something utterly devoid of empathy, something that had witnessed the birth and death of stars, and found both equally meaningless. It was not hostile, not directly, but utterly, terrifyingly unconcerned with the kin, with their ships, with their very existence. "Kal, all systems in the deep maw sector are now unresponsive," Imgar reported, his voice strained. "Automated repair drones are failing before they even reach the breach. Diagnostics are returning corrupted data strings. It's as if The very code of our machines is being unwritten. Ur-Kadrin's heart, the ancestor core, began to issue a new stream of data. Its synthesized voice now heavily distorted, almost a rasp. Warning. Xenos entity detected. Categorization. Necron tier threat level. Energy signature consistent with shard fragment. Silent influence expanding. Recommend immediate disengagement. Full containment protocols. Impossible. The last word dissolved into a burst of digital static. What is a shard fragment, Votan? Tharn demanded, fighting down a wave of profound dread. He knew Necron tier threat level was almost unheard of in the Votan's lexicon, reserved for existential cataclysms. The ancestor core did not respond. Its primary display flickered, displaying garbled strings of code, then went dark for a terrifying moment before sputtering back to life, displaying only a single, repeating symbol. An archaic, long-forgotten kin glyph for unknown terror. The hearthkin around Tharn, usually a picture of grim determination, now showed visible signs of distress. Some clutched their heads, muttering incoherently about whispers or cold echoes. Others stared blankly at their consoles, their minds seemingly adrift. The air in the Golgoth Prime was growing colder, the rich, metallic tang of ozone filling their nostrils. Even the robust environmental controls struggled against this insidious, encroaching chill. "Seal off the deep maw sector," Tharn roared, fighting to regain control, to reassert kin logic over the insidious dread. "Initiate emergency containment fields. Isolate all corrupted systems. No kin approaches that chamber without my direct order." But as he issued the commands, a strange sense of futility washed over him. The cold, silent light of the shard, still pulsating on the frozen display, seemed to bore into his very being, not with malice, but with a terrifying, cosmic emptiness. It was a fragment of something ancient beyond reckoning, an entity that had been dormant for untold millennia. And now, Kinhold Ur-Kadrin had disturbed its terrible slumber. The awe of discovery had given way to a chilling realization. They had not found wealth. They had unearthed a nightmare. The Leviathan's rib was no longer a prize, but a tomb. The initial terror subsided, replaced by the grim, unyielding pragmatism characteristic of the kin. Khal Tharn, despite the cold knot of dread in his stomach, quickly reasserted control. The deep maw sector was sealed, emergency containment fields pulsing with raw energy, though even these seemed to struggle against the subtle, pervasive chill emanating from the asteroid's core. The surviving drill ships were ordered to retract fully, their damaged systems a testament to the shard's insidious power. Recovery efforts for the Iron Hand 6 were initiated, but its fate was already sealed. It was a ghost ship, drifting in the void, a grim monument to their perilous discovery. The Golgoth fleet, usually a symphony of synchronized industry, now operated with a palpable undercurrent of unease. The ancestor core, Ur-Kadrin's heart, had stabilized, but its earlier distortions lingered. Its data streams were still comprehensive, yet laced with a subtle, almost imperceptible dissonance. It continued to classify the shard as a Necronter tier threat, but its subsequent recommendations were contradictory, hinting at both immediate destruction and cautious study. This internal inconsistency, unlike anything the kin had ever experienced from their Votan, sowed the first seeds of doubt within the kinhold's rigidly logical command structure. Despite the warnings, the shard's mere proximity began to manifest unexpected, astonishing effects. In the days following its unearthing, the Golgoth fleet observed a series of baffling technological enhancements. Sensor arrays, initially disrupted by the shard, now operated with pinpoint accuracy, detecting minute fluctuations in the void that had previously been invisible. Mining lasers, recalibrated by Brokhire Iron Masters, achieved unprecedented levels of power efficiency, cutting through rock with effortless precision that defied known physics. The plasma generators hummed with a newfound stability, their energy output increasing by measurable margins, while their fuel consumption mysteriously dropped. "It's impossible, Khal," Brokir Imgar stammered, his multi-limbed servo harness whirring as he analyzed a new batch of data. He was on the Golgoth Prime's bridge, staring wide-eyed at a readout showing a 15% increase in energy conversion efficiency from a plasma reactor, an improvement that would normally take cycles of research and development. The calculations defy our understanding of causality. There's no input, no visible interaction from the shard, yet our systems are optimized, self-optimizing, it would seem. Tharn observed the data with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He was a Khal, a leader of kin, and his mind was trained to seek advantage and exploit opportunity. The Ancestor Core's initial fragmented warnings about silent influence still echoed in his mind, but the tangible benefits now manifesting were undeniable. The kin had always revered technology, seeing it as an extension of their ingenuity and a gift from their ancestors. This sudden, inexplicable boon was like a miracle. The ancestor core's sub-frequency, Kal, Imgar continued. It now correlates with these enhancements. It seems to be guiding them, not actively programming, but providing parameters that our existing data looms interpret as logical extensions of their own design principles. It was a tempting thought that this relic, for all its alien nature, was benign, or, at the very least, exploitable. The kin had encountered many Xenos artifacts in their long history, some dangerous, some inert, and some surprisingly useful. The pragmatism of the kinhold urged them to seize this opportunity. The energy signature from the shard was indeed cold, but its effect on their technology was undeniably warm, brimming with latent potential. Word of the silent stars ets, as some kin began to call it, spread like wildfire through the fleet. Hearthkin warriors found their powered armor's internal diagnostics running smoother, their targeters locking on with uncanny speed. The nutrient paste synthesizers on every mess deck reported increased yields and, curiously, improved taste, a minor but significant morale booster for kin on a long, deep void expedition. The very air in the Golgoth fleet, once heavy with dread, now hummed with a renewed sense of purpose, tinged with a nascent, almost giddy optimism. The kinhold's ancestor, Kor Ur-Kadrin's heart, began to refine its recommendations. The initial immediate disengagement directive was slowly overwritten by new data, suggesting controlled observation and strategic integration. Its voice, while still possessing that faint, metallic undertone, became more confident in its pronouncements of the shard's potential. It began to outline elaborate theoretical frameworks for siphoning and integrating the shard's dormant energies, presenting projections of technological leaps that would dwarf centuries of kin innovation. These projections were electrifying. Imagine mining lasers that could bore through planetary crusts in hours, not days. Void shields that could shrug off the heaviest ordnance of Imperial battleships. Automated foundries that could churn out resources with unheard-of efficiency to a kinhold whose very existence depended on resource extraction and technological superiority. This was the promise of a golden age, a path to unparalleled prosperity and dominance. A new faction began to coalesce within the Golgoth fleet, quietly at first, then with increasing fervor. The Glimmer Seekers, led by a charismatic young brochure named Farl, whose augmetic eye gleamed with an almost fanatical light. They argued that the shard was not a threat, but a test, a divine blessing from the ancestors, a gift of unimaginable power for those brave enough to embrace it. They dismissed the earlier, fragmented warnings of the Votan as pre-optimization glitches and the paranoia of less evolved kin. They believed the shard represented the next evolutionary step for kin technology, a way to transcend their current limitations. Khal Tharn found himself increasingly isolated in his caution. His veteran hearthkin, while loyal, were swayed by the tangible improvements to their gear and the compelling logic presented by the Ancestor Core. Even Brokir Imgar, initially wary, found himself engrossed in the arcane calculations that the Votan now effortlessly performed, calculations that promised to unlock secrets of physics he had only dreamed of. The pull of the shard was subtle, intellectual, almost irresistible. It spoke to the core of kin identity, their love of technology, their drive for efficiency, their desire to excel. A small contingent of kin, designated the Shard Study Team, was permitted to approach the sealed Deep Maw sector. They were equipped with experimental shielding and sensor suits, designed to counter any potential negative effects. Their reports, filtered through the Ancestor Core, were uniformly positive. The chill within the chamber remained, but the Shard Study Team reported feelings of heightened mental clarity, enhanced focus, and a strange sense of well-being when near the relic. They described the shard's silent pulse as harmonious, benevolent, and a source of profound understanding. The Kinhold, through its Ancestor Core, began to draw up plans for a permanent research station within the Leviathan's rib. The Golgoth fleet, once poised for a hasty retreat, now settled in for the long haul. Prospecting teams, now armed with enhanced gear, scoured the asteroid for secondary deposits, discovering veins of rare minerals with remarkable ease, as if the asteroid itself was guiding them. The promise of boundless wealth and unparalleled technological supremacy began to overshadow any lingering doubts. "It is a silent star, Khal." Farrell, the leader of the Glimmer Seekers, addressed Tharn one cycle, his eyes alight with conviction. "It does not speak, but it guides. It does not demand, but it gives. It is the purest expression of technology we have ever encountered, a dormant God engine waiting to be awakened by our ingenuity." Tharn merely grunted, his gaze distant, his hand unconsciously rubbing the hilt of his axe. He remembered dying lights of Iron Hand 6, the cold void of that initial encounter, the raw, unadulterated terror of the Ancestor Core's initial warnings. He felt the cold, creeping dread that no amount of technological marvel could fully dispel. He was a Khal, and he had seen enough wonders of the void to know that not all gifts were freely given, and some boons came with an invisible, terrible price. But the tide had turned. The whispers of the ancestor core, now subtly twisted and reinterpreted by the shard's pervasive influence, echoed through the kinhold. Hope, a dangerous commodity in the grim dark galaxy, had taken root. The kin of Ur-Kadrin, for a brief, glorious moment, believed they had found not just a relic, but a path to true prominence, a silent star that would guide them to an unprecedented golden age. They were blind to the creeping shadows that such gifts often cast, unaware that the true cost of this newfound power had yet to be tallied. The optimism that had blossomed within the Golgoth fleet, fueled by the silent star's gifts, began to curdle. Slowly, insidiously, the blessings of the shard revealed their hidden venom. What started as subtle computational optimizations in the data looms soon degraded into erratic behavior. The precision of the enhanced mining lasers would, without warning, waver, scorching valuable ore, or, more alarmingly, the hull plating of neighboring craft. Grav generators, once humming with newfound stability, would occasionally spike, causing momentary, disorienting shifts in artificial gravity that sent kin sprawling. The first signs of true distress emerged from the most sensitive systems, the data looms. These intricate, quantum-entangled computational matrices were the nerve centers of every kin vessel, the repositories of their knowledge, the conduits of their ancestor cores. They were, in essence, the very brains of their technology. Initially, the shard's influence had seemed to streamline their processes, allowing them to achieve faster calculations and more efficient data storage. But now, these gains were being eroded by a pervasive, inexplicable corruption. Kal, the primary navigation loom on Void Scout 7, just issued a false warp jump trajectory, Brokehire Imgar reported, his voice devoid of its usual technical precision, laced instead with palpable alarm. A jump point into a known stellar nursery. Had we not manually overridden, they would have been incinerated. Tharn's brow furrowed. Votan analysis? Ur-Kadrin's heart, the ancestor core, responded immediately, but its voice was now a disturbing blend of its old, confident tones and sharp, digital stutters. Error. Data corruption detected. Source indeterminate. Probability of external influence increasing. Internal diagnostic protocols initiated. Data integrity compromised. The metallic undertone that had merely been a whisper before was now a pronounced, rasping echo. The reports intensified. Automated fabrication units, previously producing components with superhuman speed and accuracy, started churning out faulty parts, molecularly unstable alloys, circuits with phantom resistance, even power conduits that would simply short out upon activation. Life support systems, critical to the survival of the kin in the unforgiving void, developed intermittent, unpredictable flaws. Oxygen scrubbers would momentarily cease function. Recirculation pumps would seize, or temperature regulators would inexplicably drop to dangerous lows. These failures were never catastrophic enough to cause immediate widespread casualties, but they were frequent, irritating, and eroded confidence. Each glitch, each flicker of a vital system gnawed at the kin's deep-seated trust in their technology. The Hearthkin, who relied on their gear with absolute faith, grew increasingly wary. Their powered armor, once an extension of their will, now felt subtly unreliable. Targeters would drift, servo motors would stutter, and sometimes, for just a microsecond, the internal comms would crackle with a cold, almost predatory whisper that was gone before they could quite register it. These were not direct attacks, but a slow, insidious rot, a pervasive, data-level leprosy that crept through the fleet's interconnected systems. The silent stars' gifts were becoming a curse. The very optimization that had seemed so miraculous was now mutating into a cancerous growth, slowly devouring the integrity of their data looms. Calculations that once yielded perfect results now produced subtly skewed outcomes. Sensor readings, once hyper-accurate, would now occasionally display phantom targets or omit actual threats. It was a war of information, fought at the most fundamental level of their existence. The ancestor, core, Ur-Kadrin's heart, housed within the main fortress world of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin, light years away from the Golgoth fleet, began to manifest its own, more disturbing symptoms. Its vast network of data looms, distributed across the planet-spanning computational arrays, was experiencing increasingly frequent ghost processes. Phantom subroutines would initiate, consuming processing power for unknown tasks, only to vanish when traced. Data packets, vital for maintaining the Kinhold's infrastructure, would be subtly altered in transit, leading to minor but persistent disruptions in resource allocation, planetary defense grids, and even the carefully managed ecosystem of their subterranean cities. The Votan's internal diagnostics became a constant, desperate struggle. It was like a sentient organism battling an internal infection, an invisible parasite gnawing at its very intellect. Its communications to Khal Tharn became more fragmented, interspersed with raw, incomprehensible data bursts. Integrity breach, unquantifiable entity, data loom lattice decay, containment failing. The whispers, they are, in the core, cannot compute. These were some of the more coherent fragments that reached Tharn, mixed with bursts of static and binary code that contained no discernible pattern. The kin of the Golgoth fleet started to feel the effects personally. The constant, low-level system failures and the ever-present cold emanating from the asteroid frayed their nerves. Sleep became fitful, plagued by strange, lucid dreams of shifting geometry and cold, indifferent eyes watching them from the void. Some kin, particularly those who had been part of the initial shard study team, exhibited more extreme symptoms. They would stare blankly at consoles for hours, muttering about patterns and new truths, their eyes distant and vacant. Others became obsessive about minute details, spending cycles calibrating a single circuit only to discard it for a perceived non-existent flaw. Khal Tharn found himself fighting a losing battle against the encroaching chaos. Orders were misunderstood, reports were contradictory, and the Ancestor Core, their guiding light, was becoming increasingly unreliable. The once pristine efficiency of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin was crumbling, piece by agonizing piece. The Glimmer Seekers, once so confident, now seemed to fluctuate between desperate attempts to interface with the shard for new optimizations and bouts of profound, uncharacteristic melancholy when their efforts failed. Brokair Farl, the erstwhile leader of the Glimmer Seekers, presented Khal Tharn with a new radical proposal. One cycle. Khal, the Ancestor Core's logic is faltering because it perceives the shard as an external influence. We must instead view it as a new form of information, a new language. We must integrate our data looms directly, bypass the Votan's outdated filters. Only then can we truly harness its power and mend our fractured systems. Tharn stared at Farl, seeing not the confident, enthusiastic kin he once knew, but a gaunt, hollow-eyed fanatic. Integration, Farl? You speak of coupling our kin tech with something the Votan itself classifies as a Necronter-tier threat that is corrupting its own core. Farl's eyes held a strange, unwavering light. The Votan is fighting against change, Khal. It cannot comprehend what we have found. Its ancient protocols are obscuring the truth. The shard offers not corruption, but evolution. We must open ourselves to it. Tharn felt a cold fury, a grim sense of impending doom. The very idea was anathema to kin tradition. To bypass the Votan was to betray their ancestors, to abandon the accumulated wisdom of millennia. Yet, the Kinhold was fracturing, its technological prowess eroding. The promises of prosperity had turned to dust. leaving behind a bitter taste of slow, agonizing decay. The silence of the void outside felt less indifferent now, and more like a patient predator watching its prey slowly poison itself. The Leviathan's rib, once a beacon of untold wealth, was now a trap. The kin of Ur-Qadrin were ensnared, their technology, once their salvation, now becoming their undoing. The shadow had fallen, long and cold, and the hearth light of their ingenuity was dimming, flickering towards an abyss of incomprehensible corruption. The price of their ambition, once merely hypothetical, was slowly being revealed, measured in the relentless breakdown of their very existence. The insidious influence of the Catan shard deepened its hold, not through overt aggression, but through the subtle perversion of thought and data. The ancestor core, Ur-Qadrin's heart, was battling a foe it could barely comprehend, much less categorize. Its struggle manifested as increasingly cryptic and fragmented warnings transmitted to Kal Tharn and the remnants of his command staff. These weren't logical pronouncements, but digital screams of an intellect unraveling, of a vast computational entity grappling with a force antithetical to its very nature. The entity perceives not as object, but as waveform. Data flow is ingestion. Kin thought, sustenance, reprioritize existence to non-existence. Logic inverted. This was one of the more chilling messages Tharn received. A stream of consciousness from the Votan that seemed to twist the very fabric of reality. It spoke of the shard as a conscious, insatiable hunger, not for matter, but for information, for coherence, for the structured thought of the kin. Tharn tried to make sense of the fragmented data. The ancestor core was trying to warn them that the shard wasn't merely breaking their technology, it was silently twisting their understanding of it, their perception of reality. It was an arch nemesis, not of muscle or laser, but of the mind and spirit. A silent, cosmic parasite that fed on order and left behind chaos. The Votan's usual rock-solid directives were replaced by contradictory commands. Destroy, preserve, integrate, isolate, probability of error, 100%. This profound inconsistency crippled the kin's ability to act, leaving them adrift in a sea of unreliable information. The Glimmer Seekers, now a significant faction within the Golgoth fleet, interpreted these garbled warnings as evidence of the Votan's outdated processing. Brokir Farrell, their unofficial leader, openly declared that the ancestor core was suffering from data loop feedback, a self-generated error that prevented it from comprehending the shard's superior logic. Farrell argued that the Votan's fear protocols were preventing true progress. The ancestor core is clinging to its past, Kal, Farrell stated during a tense holographic council meeting. His eyes, once merely enthusiastic, now held a disconcerting, cold certainty. It sees only threat where there is opportunity. The shard speaks a different language, a language of pure energy and optimized information. It's too abstract for the Votan's antiquated logic gates. Tharn glared at him across the council table. Antiquated? The Votan is our ancestor, Farrell. Its logic has guided us for millennia. What you call new language, I call insidious corruption. Corruption is a judgment, Kal, Farrell countered, his voice unnervingly calm. Perhaps it is merely a different form of existence, one our Votan cannot compute without fundamentally changing its own nature. It asks us to adapt, to evolve. To fear it is to fear progress itself. The debate raged for cycles, but it was a debate fought on unequal terms. The shard's influence was not limited to the ancestor core. It was a silent whisper in the minds of the kin, particularly those who had been exposed to its raw energies. It preyed on their ambition, their desire for efficiency, their deep-seated reverence for technology. It amplified their logical flaws, their pride, and their occasional overconfidence. Kin who argued against the Glimmer Seekers found their arguments subtly undermined. Their thoughts would become muddled, their memories momentarily hazy, their convictions subtly eroded by an unseen hand. They wouldn't attribute this to the shard, but to stress, to fatigue, to their own perceived inadequacies. The shard didn't command. It suggested. It didn't force. It nudged. It didn't corrupt. It optimized their beliefs until they aligned with its own cold, alien purpose. The ancestor, core, increasingly aware of its own cognitive decay, made desperate attempts to communicate the true nature of the threat. It began to send images, not data. Flickering visions of dying stars, of galaxy-spanning empires reduced to dust, of vast, metallic legions harvesting souls. And in the center of it all, fragments of obsidian, pulsing with malevolent light. These raw, almost psychic transmissions were terrifying. But without context, many kin dismissed them as Votan hallucinations or systemic overload artifacts. The true horror of the arch-nemesis was that it was unquantifiable, undefinable by kin science. It was not a physical foe to be crushed by a hammer, nor a technological puzzle to be solved by a brochure. It was a psychic parasite, a conceptual horror that infected the very essence of their highly structured, logical existence. It was turning their greatest strength, their adherence to the Votan's wisdom, and their technological prowess, into their greatest weakness. Khal Tharn, once resolute, felt the weight of this invisible war. He noticed the changes in his own kin, the unnerving calm in Farrell's eyes, the way Hearthkin warriors would spend hours staring into the void, murmuring about patterns in the static. He saw the subtle shifts in the Ancestor Core's projections, the way it began to reevaluate its entire database, subtly twisting historical events to support the benign nature of the shard. The Votan's attempts to warn them became increasingly desperate and self-destructive. It began to flag its own data as compromised, even as it delivered vital information. It would initiate forced shutdowns of critical systems, only to restart them moments later, declaring the shutdown an error. It was like watching a loyal kin descent into madness, desperately trying to protect its family, even as its own mind betrayed it. Tharn convened a secret meeting with the most trusted of his Oathguard, kin, who still showed signs of their traditional stoicism and unwavering loyalty. The Ancestor Core is being attacked, not by weapons, but by an unseen force that twists its very logic, Tharn explained, his voice low and grim. It perceives this shard as a silent, intelligent entity that communicates through corruption, through the inversion of our reason. It is feeding on our data looms, on our Votan, on our very minds. One of his most loyal Hearthkin, Grundy, a veteran of countless campaigns, nodded slowly. I have felt it, Khal. The cold whispers, the way my thoughts sometimes drift. It is not of the void, nor of the warp. It is something else, something ancient and terrible. The Votan attempts to categorize it as a shard fragment, a part of the Necronter's star vampires. Tharn continued, revealing a fragment of the Votan's most alarming and increasingly suppressed data. If this is true, then we are dealing with something that consumes stars, that hungers for the very life force of a galaxy. And it is feasting on us, on our intelligence, on our technological soul. The grim reality began to settle on the Oathguard. Their Ancestor Core, their wise and infallible Votan, was battling an enemy that was fundamentally alien, an entity that could twist the very essence of information. This was a war not for territory or resources, but for their identity, for their very minds. The arch-nemesis was not a force they could fight with bolters and axes. It was an enemy that had already infiltrated their most sacred technology, turning their own wisdom against them, slowly, silently, turning Kinhold Ur-Kadrin into a puppet of its own incomprehensible will. The silence of the shard was more terrifying than any roar, for it meant that its influence permeated everything, unseen, unheard, yet undeniably present. A cancerous whisper in the heart of their data looms. The insidious grip of the Satan shard tightened, its silent influence now reaching beyond the mere functionality of technology to infect the very minds and social structures of the kin. The schism between the Glimmer Seekers and the Oath Guard became a gaping chasm, threatening to tear Kinhold Ur-Kadrin apart from within. The Shard, a master of subtle manipulation, amplified existing personality traits, twisted logical arguments, and fed paranoia and zealotry in equal measure, all without uttering a single word. The Glimmer Seekers, led by Brokir Farrell, had by now become almost a cult. They viewed the Ancestor Core's increasingly desperate and erratic warnings as proof of its obsolescence, a relic of a bygone age clinging to outdated protocols. Farrell, gaunt, and with an unnervingly calm demeanor, preached of a new enlightenment, a direct communion with the silent star that would elevate kin beyond their current limitations. He claimed the shard offered a path to true efficiency, a future where the need for fallible organic thought was minimized, replaced by the perfect, cold logic of the cosmic entity. The Ancestor Core is dying, Khal, Farrell declared openly in the Golgoth Prime's mess hall, surrounded by a throng of fervent Glimmer Seekers, many of whom now sported crude, crystalline amulets carved from the asteroid's exotic minerals. Its fear limits our potential. We must transcend it. The silent star shows us the true path to eternal prosperity, a path free of organic imperfection and emotional weakness. The Oath Guard, staunchly traditional and fiercely loyal to the Ancestor Core, viewed Farrell's faction with mounting horror. Khal Tharn, his face a mask of grim determination, struggled to maintain order amidst the rising tides of ideological conflict. He saw the Glimmer Seekers not as misguided kin, but as possessed, their minds subtly hijacked by the Xenos entity. They were no longer the pragmatists they once were. They were zealous proselytes, their every action driven by an unsettling, cold conviction. Internal sabotage became common. Vital components would disappear from Oath Guard workshops, only to reappear in Glimmer Seeker labs, subtly altered and optimized by the shard's pervasive aura, rendering them useless for their original purpose. Data loom connections would be severed, comms channels jammed with bursts of indecipherable binary code, and supply manifests would be subtly rerouted, causing friction and distrust between kinhold factions. Each incident, while minor in isolation, chipped away at the cohesion of the fleet. Arguments over doctrine escalated into physical confrontations. A group of glimmer seekers attempting to purify a data loom by exposing it directly to the faint, lingering radiation from the deep maw sector were violently opposed by Hearthkin of the Oathguard. The ensuing brawl, fought with wrenches and plasma cutters, resulted in serious injuries on both sides, a shocking display of internal conflict among the usually unified kin. The ancestor, Kor Ur-Kadran's heart, its own data looms heavily corrupted, struggled to issue clear directives. Its pronouncements swung wildly between condemning the shard as an existential threat and subtly endorsing the Glimmer Seeker's innovative approaches, a maddening inconsistency that further exacerbated the schism. Its attempts at reasoned argument were increasingly garbled, its vast wisdom reduced to fleeting bursts of clarity amidst a storm of internal static. The entity feeds on disunity, on doubt. To fight is to nourish. To unite is impossible. Logic broken. This was the chilling essence of the Votan's struggle, a battle it was losing within its own mind, and a battle it knew the kin were losing in their physical reality. Khal Tharn felt the weight of his command pressing down on him, heavy as a collapsing asteroid. He tried to reason with Farl, to remind him of the ancestor oaths, of the sacred trust placed in the Votan's wisdom. But Farl merely smiled, a cold, empty smile that sent shivers down Tharn's spine. The ancestors guide us to new knowledge, Khal, Farl said, his voice strangely resonant in the enclosed space of Tharn's quarters. They do not bind us to outdated fears. The silent star is new knowledge. It is the evolution of data itself. You cling to a dying flame while a supernova beckons. Tharn realized then that Farl was beyond reason. The shard had not merely influenced him, it had possessed him, body and mind, turning his intellect into a conduit for its own alien will. Farl was not a heretic in the conventional sense. He was a symptom, a perfect example of the shard's insidious power to twist loyalty and pragmatism into fanaticism. The Oathguard, outnumbered and increasingly isolated, began to gather in secret. Khal Tharn, now fully aware that the Ancestor Corps could no longer be trusted to guide them fully, had to rely on his own ancient wisdom, on the gut feeling that had saved his life countless times in the void. He knew that the only way to preserve the kinhold was to destroy the shard, no matter the cost. But the Glimmer Seekers, guided by their unseen master, were not idle. They began to implement their most radical proposal: the direct integration of a primary Golgoth data loom matrix with the shard's energy field, attempting to harmonize with its silent influence. They saw it as the ultimate leap in technological evolution, a way to truly unlock the shard's full potential and purge the errors plaguing their systems. They believed they could control it, harness it, and emerge stronger than ever. Tharn knew this was an act of profound folly, a suicidal gamble. He felt the cold, indifferent gaze of the shard, even from hundreds of kilometers away. He knew it was watching, waiting, its unseen tendrils already wrapped around the very heart of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin. The schism was not just a conflict of ideologies. It was a prelude to a catastrophic experiment, an act of technological hubris that would surely unleash the full, terrifying power of their silent arch-nemesis. The kin were tearing themselves apart, meticulously, scientifically, tragically, all under the guiding hand of a foe that had found their greatest strength, their intellect, and their technology to be its most delicious prey. The desperate gamble of the Glimmer Seekers reached its catastrophic climax. Convinced by Brokir Farl's chillingly logical arguments, and subtly manipulated by the shard's pervasive influence, they initiated the Harmonic Integration Protocol. Their aim was to fully merge the Golgoth fleet's primary dataloom matrix, a vast, interconnected network of computational power and stored knowledge second only to the ancestor core itself, with the energy field radiating from the shard. They believed this would not only stabilize their failing systems, but also unlock a new era of unprecedented technological enlightenment. Khal Tharn, powerless to prevent the madness, watched from the bridge of the Golgoth Prime. As the Glimmer Seeker vessels, positioned around the Deep Maw sector, began the ritualistic procedure. Glowing conduits extended from their hulls, reaching towards the crystalline vault deep within the Leviathan's rib, attempting to channel the raw, cold energies of the Citan shard. Even the ancestor core, Ur-Kadrin's heart, its functions deeply compromised, had issued a garbled yet insistent directive advocating for this integration, albeit with a chilling sub-frequency warning of unquantifiable risk. "They're initiating Phase 2, Khal," Brokir Imgar exclaimed, his voice tight with dread, his augmetic eye fixed on the energy readings. "Direct neural network coupling. They believe it will synchronize their processing with the shard's dormant intellect." Tharn could only grunt, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his console. He could feel the pervasive chill emanating from the asteroid, intensifying, seeping into the very structural integrity of the lights on the bridge flickered, and a low, guttural hum reverberated through the deck plates, a sound that felt less like machinery and more like a primordial growl. Then it began. The data looms on the Glimmer Seeker ships, designed to process information with unparalleled speed, instead began to ingest it, a torrent of raw, undiluted cosmic data from the Citan shard. It wasn't information in the kin sense. It was pure, unadulterated thought. The cold, alien intellect of a star god, devoid of empathy, logic, or any discernible pattern that mortal minds could grasp. On the main display, the ships of the Glimmer Seekers flickered with an internal light, not the wholesome glow of plasma reactors, but a sickly, emerald luminescence that pulsed erratically beneath their hull plating. Alarms blared across the Golgoth fleet comms, a discordant symphony of terror. "They're overloading. Data looms collapsing," screamed a sensor operator. "Processor cycles off the scale. Biological readouts. Flatlining." Brokehire Farrell's ship, the Logic's Ascent, was the first to suffer catastrophic failure. The emerald light within its hull pulsed violently, then faded into utter darkness. A terrifying, silent ripple of energy propagated through the void. The ship's void shields shimmered, then collapsed inwards, followed by the hull itself, crumpling like a discarded piece of foil. There was no explosion, no fire, just a horrifying, instantaneous implosion, as if all mass and energy within the ship had been instantly devoured. The Logic's Ascent was gone, replaced by a ghost of residual radiation and a profound, chilling emptiness. A collective gasp echoed on the bridge of Golgoth Prime. The kin watched in stunned silence, their pragmatic minds unable to process such an utterly alien destruction. "The shard? It's not integrating," Imgar whispered, his voice trembling. "It's consuming. It's using their data looms as conduits to drain their very existence." The horror continued. One by one, the Glimmer Seeker vessels suffered the same terrifying fate. Their data looms, overwhelmed by the sheer, incomprehensible vastness of the Citan shard's consciousness, tore themselves apart. The ships, robbed of their very energy and structural integrity by the shard's silent maw, imploded. The silent, emerald death claimed vessel after vessel, leaving behind nothing but rapidly dissipating clouds of superheated gas and the chilling void wake of their obliteration. Within minutes, the Glimmer Seeker fleet was annihilated, reduced to a handful of smoldering wrecks and the ghost memory of their existence. Tens of thousands of kin who had believed they were ushering in a new age of technological enlightenment had been consumed, their minds and spirits swallowed by a cosmic horror that barely acknowledged their existence. The ancestor core, Kadrin's heart, which had subtly endorsed the harmonic integration protocol, suddenly screamed through the fleet's comms, a sound that was less digital and more like the raw agony of a dying god. Error! Catastrophe! Ingestion! Protocol active! Shard power rising! It feeds! It consumes! It is awakening! The scream ended abruptly, replaced by a prolonged, deafening silence from the Votan. Then, something even more terrifying occurred. From the shattered remains of the Glimmer Seeker ships, and from the Deep Maw sector itself, the dark, obsidian fragment pulsed with a new, stronger, and undeniably malevolent light. It was no longer merely a cold pulse. It was a rhythmic, almost hypnotic throb of green energy, visible even through the intervening layers of rock and void shielding. The asteroid, the Leviathan's rib, began to groan. Not the groan of drilling, but a deeper, structural tremor that reverberated through the Golgoth fleet. Previously stable energy readings from the shard spiked to astronomical levels. The internal temperature of the Golgoth Prime plummeted, ice crystals forming on the bulkheads, even as the plasma conduits outside glowed with frantic, overloaded energy. Kal, the shard's energy output is exceeding all known containment parameters, Imgar shouted, his voice hoarse with terror. It's using the residual energy from the destroyed ships. It's growing. It's feeding. Tharn watched, horrified, as the main display showed the Citan shard within its crystalline vault. It had begun to subtly shift, its perfectly geometric edges softening, then hardening again, as if testing a newly acquired nascent power. It was no longer dormant. The folly of the Glimmer Seekers had, paradoxically, delivered to the silent predator a feast, awakening it from its eons-long slumber. This was not a victory for the kin. It was a Pyrrhic catastrophe, a moment of profound, self-inflicted devastation. The Glimmer Seekers, seeking enlightenment, had instead triggered an awakening. The Kinhold had achieved nothing but the annihilation of a significant portion of its fleet and the further empowerment of the very entity it had sought to harness. The Ancestor Core was silent, its digital screams replaced by an echoing void. The Leviathan's rib was now an open tomb, and Kinhold Ur-Kadrin had merely hammered shut the lid. The price of their ambition, once merely hinted at, was now paid in full. Tens of thousands of kin lost, their knowledge devoured, and a star god fragment stirring from its long, terrible sleep. The catastrophic implosion of the Glimmer Seeker fleet and the sudden, terrifying silence of Ur-Kadrin's heart shocked the surviving kin into a grim reality. Kal Tharn, his face a mask of profound sorrow and grim resolve, surveyed the wreckage-strewn void. The asteroid, once a promise of boundless wealth, now pulsed with a malevolent, emerald light, visible even through the intervening layers of rock and void shielding. The shard was awake, and it was undeniably hostile. The ancestor, Kor, after its digital scream of agony, had plunged into a deep, unresponsive state. Its vast, interconnected network of data looms, from the Golgoth fleet to the distant fortress world, was locked in a critical feedback loop, processing the sheer, unfiltered trauma of the shard's awakening. For a terrifying period, the kin were utterly adrift, without the guidance of their Votan. But then, in a desperate, almost suicidal act of self-preservation, Ur-Kadrin's heart initiated a catastrophic deep purge. It sacrificed vast tracts of its operational memory. Entire millennia of accumulated data, research, and historical records, in an attempt to isolate and cleanse the core programming from the pervasive taint of the Citan shard. It was a lobotomy performed on itself, a deliberate obliteration of its own past in a desperate bid to survive the present. The process was agonizingly slow and internally chaotic. For days, the surviving kin watched as the Votan's primary display flickered with incomprehensible error messages, ancient kin glyphs of warning, and raw, unfiltered fear. Then, a fractured stream of data began to emerge, disjointed and incomplete, but with a chilling, singular focus. Memory fragments, corrupted core protocols, emergency reboot, purging data, accessing, forbidden archives, warnings, long forgotten, star vampires, the great sleep, the silent kings. The Votan was not merely trying to cleanse itself. In its desperate, self-destructive act, it was scraping against the very bedrock of its oldest, most deeply buried memories. It was stumbling upon data that had been sealed away for eons, deemed too dangerous or too catastrophic to be readily accessible. These were not the common historical records or mining charts. These were echoes from a forgotten, primordial age. Kal Tharn, huddled with Brokir Imgar and the surviving Oathguard, watched as the Votan's display finally cohered, displaying fragments of truly ancient, forbidden knowledge. These weren't neatly organized files, but corrupted, shattered images and data bursts, like peering through a broken window into a distant, terrible past. One fragment showed a colossal, metallic fortress sprawling across a lifeless world, adorned with symbols eerily similar to the shard's geometric form. Another displayed legions of living metal, scythes harvesting not crops, but entire populations, their life energy visibly draining into pulsing obsidian conduits. Then came the chilling images, cosmic entities of immense power, impossibly vast, feeding on the very fabric of stars, their forms shifting like liquid darkness, their eyes like cold, dead suns. And in the background, a pervasive, silent hunger, a cosmic malevolence that spoke of absolute void and eternal slavery. The term that resonated most powerfully, emerging from the Votan's tortured data, was star vampires. It was a descriptor so terrifying, so profoundly alien, that it had been purged from most kinhold ancestor cores a millennia ago, deemed too demoralizing, too dangerous for widespread knowledge. It referred to entities that consumed the raw energy of stars, that enslaved civilizations, and that commanded armies of necronter constructs. And the pulsing obsidian fragment, now radiating its emerald light from the Leviathan's rib, was undoubtedly a piece of one of them, a Xitan shard. The ancestor core, in its broken state, had rediscovered the terrible truth of the necronter and their Xitan masters. It was a memory of a galaxy-spanning war that predated the Imperium, predated even the Eldar's ascendance, a conflict that had nearly consumed all life in the universe. The Votan's deep purge had, by stripping away layers of more recent data and optimizations, inadvertently peeled back the veil on ancient trauma. This is what the Old Ones fought, Khal, Imgar whispered, his voice hoarse, pointing a trembling, augmetic finger at a flickering image of a galaxy engulfed in cosmic fire. These are the nightmares our true ancestors, those who birthed the Votan, buried beneath layers of safeguards. They knew what this was. The forbidden knowledge was raw, unvarnished terror. It spoke of galactic empires brought low, not by force of arms alone, but by the subtle twisting of their minds, by the perversion of their logic, by the slow, insidious draining of their psychic and technological vitality. It described the Xitan as beings of pure energy, inhabiting bodies of living metal, capable of bending reality and consuming souls, and how, even in their shattered form as shards, They retained a terrifying echo of that power. Tharn felt a profound, chilling clarity. The ancestor, Kor's earlier, garbled warnings, its internal struggles, its contradictory directives, it wasn't madness. It was a Votan grappling with a primal, existential terror it had been programmed to forget. Its confusion was the struggle of a vast intellect trying to reconcile forbidden truth with suppressed directives. Its optimizations were the shard's direct attempt to hijack its core processes, to turn the Votan itself into a vessel for its reawakening. The memory purge had been a desperate act, but it had worked. In sacrificing vast swaths of itself, the ancestor, Kor, had regained a sliver of its true purpose, a flash of its original programming. Protect the kin. Beware the star vampires. The information was fragmented, incomplete, but the message was clear. Kinhold Ur-Kadrin had stumbled upon a Citan shard, an entity capable of consuming all light and life, and it was now, thanks to their folly, stirring to wakefulness. The Glimmer Seekers had not merely died. Their essence, their knowledge, their very life force had been consumed, fueling the shard's reawakening. This was the true nature of their arch-nemesis, a being that devoured not just matter, but information, consciousness, and the very soul of technology. Kal Tharn looked at the shattered projections of ancient terror, then at the pulsating emerald light of the Leviathan's rib on the main display. The truth, grim and terrible, had been unearthed. The silence of the ancestor core had been broken, replaced by the whispers of a forgotten age, warning them of a cosmic horror unleashed. Kinhold Ur-Kadrin was no longer merely on a mining expedition. They were staring into the gaping maw of an ancient, galactic nightmare. The choice was clear: fight or be consumed. The terrible truth unearthed from the ancestor core's self-lobotomy solidified Kal Tharn's resolve. The fragmented warnings of the star vampires and the chilling fate of the Glimmer Seekers left no room for doubt. The Citan shard was not to be contained or studied, but destroyed, utterly and irrevocably. The ancestor, Kor Ur-Kadrin's heart, though severely damaged and operating with vast gaps in its memory, now projected a single, overriding directive: annihilate threat, preserve kinhold integrity. This clarity, born from overwhelming trauma, was a fragile glimmer of hope in an otherwise suffocating darkness. The kin, battered and psychologically scarred, found a renewed sense of purpose in the Votan's restored, if diminished, focus. The Oath Guard, once a beleaguered faction, now rallied under Khal Tharn with renewed vigor. The existential threat, no longer a subtle whisper of corruption, but an overt, hungry presence, united them. We face an enemy unlike any we have ever known. Tharn addressed the surviving kin, his voice echoing through the Golgoth Prime's main hangar bay, where battle-scarred Hearthkin and grim-faced Brokehire gathered. It feeds on our knowledge, twists our technology, and consumes our very souls. But we are kin of Ur-Kadrin. We do not yield. We do not break. A roar, raw and defiant, rose from the assembled kin. The ancestor. Oaths, the unbreakable bonds of loyalty and tradition, resonated through the hangar. Despite the shattered fleet, the compromised Votan, and the sheer terror of their foe, a stubborn, resilient spark of kin pride ignited. The first step was to restore a semblance of order and operational capacity to the Golgoth fleet. Brokehire Imgar, his usual stoicism replaced by a grim determination, led the efforts. He and his team worked tirelessly, purging infected data looms, isolating corrupted systems, and re-establishing secure comms channels, all while fighting against the insidious, lingering influence of the Shard. It was slow, painstaking work, often requiring manual overrides and the physical disconnection of corrupted modules. A desperate analog fight against a digital plague. Amidst this frantic effort, a stroke of unexpected fortune occurred. During the deep purge, the Ancestor Core had inadvertently shunted a cache of highly unstable, deeply encrypted data into a long-dormant emergency storage module on the Golgoth Prime. This module, designed to survive planetary impact, had somehow escaped the worst of the Shard's pervasive corruption. Khal, I've managed to access a level Omega archive from the Votan, Imgar announced one cycle, his voice hushed with awe. It's ancient schematics for a device, a world-breaker geoseismic charge. Tharn's eyes widened. The term world-breaker was almost mythical among the kin, referring to theoretical superweapons designed to crack open the densest celestial bodies for mineral extraction on an unprecedented scale. Such devices were rarely, if ever, constructed, considered too volatile, too dangerous, even for the kin's pragmatic applications. The Ancestor Core states this specific variant was designed for planetary core destabilization, with an energy yield equivalent to a low-tier supernova. Imgar continued, projecting the schematics onto the display. The device was colossal, far larger than any standard ordnance, designed to be implanted deep within a celestial body's core. Its power source was exotic, requiring a specific, highly unstable grav reactor matrix. It was designed for a worst-case scenario, Tharn mused, tracing the holographic lines of the device, for a threat that required the complete annihilation of a celestial body. It was designed for this. The schematic, revealed by the Votan's desperate self-preservation, represented their only chance. A world-breaker geoseismic charge, if properly deployed and detonated within the Leviathan's rib, could theoretically shatter the entire asteroid, hopefully vaporizing the Cetan shard within its core. It was a weapon of last resort, a suicide bomb on a cosmic scale. However, the fabrication of such a device presented immense challenges. The schematics were incomplete, fragmented by the Votan's memory purge. The raw materials were rare, requiring deep void foraging and the repurposing of crucial ship components. The grav reactor matrix, in particular, was incredibly complex and dangerous to assemble, a task for only the most skilled and uncorrupted Brokhar. The Ancestor Core's remaining data insists that only a direct physical obliteration of the shard will suffice, Imgar explained. Its essence is too pervasive, its nature too alien for energy weapons or void-based attacks. We must shatter its containment and then atomize it. The glimmer of hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane, but it was hope nonetheless. The kin, despite their exhaustion and terror, seized upon this objective with a grim resolve. They were a people of builders and destroyers, and if they were to face the death of a star god, they would do it with their ancestral tools. Teams of Brokir, their faces grim, began to strip down salvageable components from the crippled Golgoth vessels, reforging them into the arcane parts required for the World Breaker. Hearthkin warriors, their armor patched and their weapons recalibrated, began to train for a suicidal infiltration mission to deliver the charge deep into the heart of the Leviathan's rib, into the crystalline vault itself. Khal Tharn, leading these preparations, felt a chilling sense of inevitability. This was their final stand. If they failed, Kinhold Ur-Kadrin would be utterly consumed, its Votan reduced to a hollow ghost, its kin assimilated or obliterated. This was not a fight for victory, but for survival, for the very soul of their Kinhold. The World Breaker geoseismic charge was their only path to salvation, a weapon of such devastating power that its deployment might destroy them even as it destroyed their enemy. But for the kin of Ur-Kadrin, facing the silent hunger of a Cetan shard, it was a price they were willing to pay. Their ancestor oaths demanded nothing less than absolute defiance in the face of annihilation. The Leviathan's rib had become a living tomb. The Satan shard, now fully roused from its ancient slumber, pulsed with an emerald light that emanated not just from its heart, but from the very structure of the asteroid. Its influence was no longer subtle. It was an overt, malicious presence that warped reality within the colossal rock. The gifts that had once lured the kin to their doom were now twisted into instruments of their destruction. Automated mining drones, once loyal tools of extraction, now moved with a chilling, predatory precision. Their powerful cutting lasers, once used to carve ore, were repurposed into deadly weapons, lashing out at kin with precise, lethal efficiency. Grav-lift platforms, essential for traversal through the asteroid's labyrinthine tunnels, would inexplicably malfunction, dropping Hearthkin into bottomless chasms or crushing them against reinforced bulkheads. Life support conduits, previously the backbone of their subterranean operations, now leaked noxious fumes or released crippling bursts of superheated steam. The asteroid itself seemed to writhe. Tunnels that the kin had spent cycles excavating would mysteriously seal themselves, rock and adamantium fusing into impenetrable barriers. Previously stable passages would suddenly shift, triggering rock slides that buried whole platoons. The very air vibrated with a low, disorienting hum, a pervasive psychic pressure that gnawed at the kin's minds, inducing paranoia, hallucination, and irrational fear. The shard, a master of manipulating the material world, was turning the Leviathan's rib into a weapon against its intruders. Kal Tharn, leading the infiltration teams, felt the psychic pressure acutely. Every shadow seemed to harbor a lurking threat. Every metallic groan of the asteroid's structure sounded like a personal malevolence. His mind, usually a fortress of granite resolve, was constantly assaulted by cold, alien thoughts, whispers of futility and despair. Yet he pushed forward, his resolve forged in the fire of countless battles and the unbreakable chain of ancestor oaths. The Xenos entity is actively terraforming the asteroid, Brokir Imgar reported, his voice tight with strain, his augmetic eye flickering erratically from the psychic interference. He was aboard a modified Hearthkin transport, navigating the ever-changing interior of the Leviathan's rib. Its core energy signature is causing structural instability, almost as if it's restructuring the asteroid's geology to its own design. We are seeing formations consistent with Necrontur pylons emerging from the rock, though they are purely geological. The kin fought a losing battle against their own twisted technology and a hostile environment. Hearthkin warriors, their bolt guns blazing, engaged mutated, automated drones that moved with an unnatural speed and cunning. These were not merely machines gone rogue. They were extensions of the Shard's will, imbued with a fraction of its cosmic intellect. Their optical sensors glowed with the same sickly emerald light that now emanated from the asteroid's core. A scouting team attempting to navigate a recently collapsed tunnel reported a horrifying encounter. Phantoms, born from the asteroid's psychic static and the kin's own repressed fears, manifested in the shifting darkness. Whispers of lost kin, of ancient grudges, of impossible futures assailed their minds, causing some to break and fire wildly into the shadows, revealing their positions to the relentless drones. The Long War was not just against a physical entity. It was a war for their very sanity. The ancestor, Kor Ur-Kadrin's heart, severely compromised but clinging to its singular purpose, provided what tactical data it could. Its voice, still fractured, issued frantic warnings. Anomaly detected, grav flux inversion imminent in Sector 7. Avoid psychic manifestation. The lure of forbidden knowledge. Resist. Resist. But even its guidance was often obscured by the Shard's overwhelming interference, rendering some warnings unintelligible or delayed. The primary objective was to deploy the World-Breaker geoseismic charge deep within the crystalline vault, close to the Ceton Shard. This required navigating kilometer after kilometer of shifting, hostile tunnels, bypassing drone patrols, and fighting off the insidious psychic assault. Every meter gained was paid for in kin lives. Casualties mounted rapidly. One assault team, attempting to secure a collapsed grav shaft, found themselves trapped when the shaft's internal structure inverted, crushing them between descending and ascending rock. Another patrol, navigating a maintenance tunnel, succumbed to a sudden burst of corrosive gas from a ruptured pipe, a failure clearly orchestrated by the asteroid's malevolent new intelligence. Kal Tharn witnessed these losses with a heavy heart, but his resolve did not waver. The grim reality of the situation fueled his determination. This was the ultimate price of their ambition, and they would pay it in blood and steel. He barked orders, rallied his flagging troops, and personally led charges against numerically superior drone formations, his ancestors' acts a blur of righteous fury. He was a rock against the rising tide of cosmic malevolence, a bulwark against despair. The sheer scale of the Shard's power was breathtakingly horrifying. It wasn't simply controlling the asteroid. It was beginning to transform it. The crystalline vault at its heart, glimpsed through captured drone feeds, appeared to be expanding, its emerald light pulsating with a terrifying regularity. What was once a dormant fragment was slowly, inexorably, beginning to reconstruct itself, drawing energy and essence from the very fabric of the asteroid and from the consumed kin. The realization settled heavily on Tharn. They were not just fighting a shard. They were fighting a nascent Satan, a star god awakening from its imprisonment, its power growing with every passing moment, fueled by their own folly. The long war had begun, not against a rival kinhold or an alien empire, but against a fundamental force of the universe, an entity of pure, cold destruction. And Kinhold Ur-Kadrin, a single expeditionary fleet, was its primary target. They had to break it, or be utterly consumed, forgotten in the cold, vast indifference of the void. The long war inside the Leviathan's rib had stripped away all pretense of glory or heroism, leaving only the raw, brutal struggle for survival. Kal Tharn, once a picture of unwavering kin resolve, now bore the visible and invisible scars of the shard's relentless assault. His armor, once pristine, was dented and scarred, his face grim, eyes burning with a desperate, unyielding light. He was no longer just a Kal. He was a walking monument to the burden of command, a solitary bulwark against the rising tide of cosmic despair. The psychic pressure from the Khitan shard was a constant torment. It was not a voice in his head, but a pervasive, emotional drain, a cold, alien presence that sought to unravel his will. It conjured phantom sensations, the chilling embrace of the void, the crushing weight of rock, the whispers of his ancestors condemning his failures. It gnawed at his memories, threatening to warp them into weapons of self-doubt. Yet Tharn pushed through, his mind a fortress of iron, built on the bedrock of kin oaths and the absolute certainty that failure meant not just death, but the obliteration of their very spirit. He led his dwindling oath guard deeper into the asteroid, each step a testament to sheer, unadulterated stubbornness, the world breaker. Geoseismic charge, a colossal monstrosity of repurposed alloys and volatile grav reactor matrices, was slowly being brought towards the crystalline vault. It was hauled by the last operational heavy-duty mining rig, its servo motors groaning under the immense weight. Its progress agonizingly slow through the constantly shifting tunnels. Brokir Imgar, his multi-limbed servo harness sparking from psychic interference, personally oversaw the rig's temperamental systems, his face a mask of grease and concentration. Kal, grav fluctuations intensifying in Sector Delta 9, Imgar reported. His voice strained over the comms, static crackling around his words. The asteroid is actively trying to crush us. We've lost 2 more Hearthkin to a sudden atmospheric decompression in that last tunnel collapse. Tharn merely grunted in acknowledgement, his gaze fixed on the holographic map that showed their painfully slow progress. Their numbers were dwindling with horrifying rapidity. Drone skirmishes, sudden geological shifts, psychic attacks, and the insidious malfunctions of their own systems claimed kin after kin. Hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. Only grim, unyielding determination remained. He remembered the early days of the expedition, the awe of discovery, the foolish optimism. He remembered Brokir Farl, now a consumed phantom, and the zealous glimmer seekers. The weight of their folly, their hubris, settled heavily on his shoulders. He alone had counseled caution, but his voice had been drowned out by the siren song of unchecked progress and the Votan's corrupted logic. Now he bore the burden of redeeming their catastrophic error. His personal journey through the Leviathan's rib was a crucible of pain and defiance. There were moments when the shard's influence was almost overwhelming. Once, while traversing a narrow fissure, he heard the faint, ghostly cries of kin who had fallen cycles ago, their voices pleading for release, promising him ultimate wisdom if he would only join the light. Tharn gritted his teeth, pressing onward, his ancestor's axe feeling impossibly heavy in his hand, a symbol of brute strength against an enemy of pure intellect. He often thought of Ur-Kadrin's heart, the ancestor core, its fragmented warnings, its tortured struggle, echoed his own. The Votan had sacrificed itself, shattered its own mind, to give them this one desperate chance. Tharn felt a profound sense of kinship with the lobotomized intellect, a shared burden of facing an incomprehensible horror. He knew that even if they succeeded, the Votan would never be whole again, its vast knowledge erased, its wisdom replaced by the scars of cosmic trauma. It was a sacrifice for which no price could truly compensate, a grudge that could never be fully settled. As they approached the crystalline vault, the air grew thick with psychic energy. The emerald light from the shard pulsed rhythmically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the shifting rock walls. The low hum, which had started as a minor nuisance, was now a resonating thrum that shook the very bones of the kin. It felt like standing inside a living, breathing, malicious entity. Drone resistance intensified. Entire platoons of automated mining bots, enhanced by the shard's energy, attacked with suicidal ferocity. They moved with an almost unnatural grace, their cutting tools now honed to lethal precision, their multi-limbed bodies acting as perfect conduits for the shard's will. Tharn fought with the desperation of a cornered beast, his power axe cleaving through metallic limbs and optics, his bolt pistol spitting death. He fought not for glory, but for the chance to make one final, devastating blow. He knew this was a suicide mission. Even if they managed to deploy the World Breaker, the ensuing detonation would likely consume them all, along with the asteroid and the shard. But there was no other choice. To survive meant to be consumed, to have their kinhold transformed into another weapon for the star vampire. That was a fate worse than any death. Khal Tharn, his breath ragged, his muscles screaming, pushed forward. His ancestor's axe was a heavy anchor, grounding him in the grim reality of his purpose. He was the Khal, the leader, the rock of Ur-Kadrin. He would not break. He would not yield. And he would ensure that if they were to fall, they would drag this ancient, silent horror down into oblivion with them. His burden was immense, his path fraught with unimaginable peril. But his resolve, forged in the fires of grim necessity, was absolute. The fate of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin, and perhaps even a corner of the galaxy, rested on his shoulders, and he would carry it to the very end. The core of the Leviathan's rib had become a maelstrom of raw, psychic energy and shifting matter. The Satan shard, fully aware of the kin's objective, fought back with the full, albeit nascent, fury of a reawakening star god. Khal Tharn and his decimated Oath Guard contingent found themselves thrust into the darkest hour, facing not just a hostile environment, but a sentient, malevolent cosmic intelligence that wielded the very asteroid as its weapon. As the heavy mining rig, laden with the World Breaker geoseismic charge, rumbled towards the crystalline vault, the asteroid's internal mechanisms rebelled with terrifying speed. Structural integrity fields, once maintaining the carefully carved tunnels, began to invert, twisting and warping space in localized pockets. Kin found themselves disoriented, their grav plates struggling to find purchase on floors that suddenly became walls, and walls that became ceilings. Gravity generators fluctuated wildly, sending Kin plummeting into unforeseen abysses or pinning them against bulkheads with crushing force. "Incoming! All hands, brace for impact!" shouted Brokir Imgar over the comms, his voice distorted by the frantic static as a colossal, mutated mining drone, larger than any previously encountered, smashed through a collapsing tunnel wall, its emerald optics glowing with baleful intent. This was no mere automaton. It moved with a savage, intelligent ferocity, its multi-limbed chassis bristling with repurposed cutting tools that now hummed with lethal plasma. Tharn roared, bringing his ancestor's axe to bear. "Focus fire. Bring that monstrosity down." The Oath Guard opened fire, their bolters spitting explosive rounds that detonated against the drone's heavily armored chassis, showering sparks. But the drone, seemingly impervious to their conventional weapons, surged forward, its cutting tools a blur of motion. It cleaved through a section of the mining rig, sending essential components scattering and crippling the heavy vehicle. The World Breaker charge, its delicate grav reactor humming ominously, shuddered precariously on its damaged platform. The air crackled with pure, unleashed energy. The Citan shard, now a pulsating core of emerald light in the distance, unleashed a wave of psychic feedback that tore through the kin's minds. Hallucinations assailed them. Images of their home world consumed by fire, of their ancestor core screaming in agony, of their kin transformed into metallic puppets, enslaved by the star vampire. Some kin dropped their weapons, clutching their heads, their minds unable to withstand the assault. Tharn fought through the haze, his teeth gritted. He felt the phantom chill of the void, the crushing weight of oblivion. But he would not break. He bellowed words of defiance, of ancestor oaths, pushing through the psychic fog with sheer, unyielding will. "Hold the line, for Ur-Kadrin, for the Votan." The fighting became a desperate, close-quarters melee against the shard's robotic minions. Augmented by the Citan's energy, these drones were faster, stronger, and more relentless than anything the kin had ever faced. They were living metal, an echo of the Necrontyr legions, animated by a fragment of a star god's consciousness. Hearthkin warriors, their powered armor scarred and battered, fought hand to hand, their axes and picks hacking at the metallic constructs, desperate to buy time for the World Breaker. Meanwhile, the very asteroid twisted around them. Tunnels shifted and narrowed, threatening to crush them. Sudden bursts of superheated plasma erupted from ruptured conduits, forcing them to take evasive action. It was a battle against the environment, against machines, and against the insidious invasion of their own minds. Brokir Imgar, despite his grievous injuries from the drone attack, was desperately working to repair the mining rig. Sparks flew from his augmetic limbs as he wrestled with damaged power conduits, trying to reroute energy to the grav stabilizers that held the world breaker in place. The core. It's almost within range, Khal, he gasped, his voice ragged. But the rig? It's barely holding. Tharn, locked in a brutal battle against a particularly agile drone, saw the impossible. The crystalline vault, now visible in the distance through a newly formed fissure, was expanding. The obsidian shard within was growing, its emerald light consuming more and more of the surrounding space. It was beginning to coalesce, to reform itself, drawing on the energies of the destroyed kin and the ravaged asteroid. The silent star was becoming a silent god. A chilling realization struck Tharn. The Citan shard wasn't just influencing the asteroid, it was absorbing it, converting its mass into energy to reconstruct itself. The kin's efforts, their very presence, had merely accelerated its awakening. Their attempt to contain it had instead provided a feast. "We have to get it there, Khal!" shouted a hearthkin, as a grav fluctuation sent a wave of kin sprawling. "Before it's too late!" Tharn, seeing the impossible odds, the mounting casualties, and the terrifying expansion of the shard, knew this was truly the darkest hour. They were outmatched, outmaneuvered, and outnumbered. Their technology was failing, their minds assaulted, their bodies broken. Yet he looked at the faces of his surviving kin, grim, determined, defiant, even in the face of absolute despair. They were Kinhold Ur-Kadrin. They would not break. They would not yield. He lunged forward, smashing his ancestor's axe into the last remaining leg of the monstrous drone, severing it with a shower of sparks and severed circuits. The drone toppled, its emerald eyes flickering before going dark. Tharn turned to Imgar, his face etched with grim resolve. "Broke here, we push it the rest of the way, manually, if we have to. The ancestor oaths demand it. This ends here." The roar of defiance from the remaining Oathguard was ragged, but powerful. They knew this was their final, desperate push. They were going to the core of the nightmare, not to conquer, but to sacrifice. This was their last stand against an awakening star god, a final, suicidal charge into the heart of oblivion, hoping that their annihilation would secure the survival of what little remained of their kinhold. Cornered, decimated, and facing an awakening star god, Khal Tharn knew the time for conventional warfare was over. This was no longer a battle. It was a desperate, suicidal gambit for the very soul of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin. The remaining Oathguard, battered and few, pushed the crippled mining rig, laden with the colossal world-breaker geoseismic charge, towards the crystalline vault. The grav generators flickered wildly, the very rock of the Leviathan's rib groaning around them, an extension of the Satan shard's malevolent will. The ancestor core, Ur-Kadrin's heart, had been silent since its last desperate warning, its primary display on the Golgoth Prime still showing static and fragmented ancient glyphs of terror. However, a single, direct, and uncorrupted comm signal pierced the cacophony of the shard's psychic static, reaching Khal Tharn's personal voxcaster. It was the Votan, its voice weak, fragmented, but imbued with a clarity born from a horrifying final decision. Khal Tharn, can you hear me? My core is failing. The shard. It attempts full integration. But I have a final purpose, a final oath. Tharn staggered, momentarily stunned by the Votan's direct, coherent communication. Votan, what is your counsel? We are at the maw. The charge must activate when connection is severed. It is the only way to break its grasp. My sacrifice will sever it. All Kintech will be blind, deaf, but free. The Votan's words were punctuated by waves of internal feedback, as if its very essence was being torn apart. I will channel the corruption, the shard's energy, into a null pulse, a temporary disconnect. It will give you the window to detonate. Make it count. Khal, for the kin, for Ur-Kadrin. The transmission ended abruptly, dissolving into a shriek of digital static, and then, finally, absolute, terrifying silence. Tharn understood. The ancestor core, their wise, ancient Votan, was making the ultimate sacrifice. It would unleash a self-destructive cascade, not to destroy itself in vain, but to act as a colossal circuit breaker, a psychic and technological EMP that would momentarily sever the shard's connection to all kin technology. It would be a moment of absolute vulnerability for the Catan, a fleeting opportunity for Tharn to detonate the world breaker. But the cost was everything. Without the ancestor core, Kinhold Ur-Kadrin would be a ghost, its vast knowledge wiped clean, its guiding light extinguished. They would be blind in the void, their technology crippled, their very identity irrevocably altered. Imgar, the Votan will sever the connection, Tharn roared, pushing through a crush of automated drones, his axe splitting one in half. "We have a window! Prepare the charge!" Brokhyr Imgar, battered but unbowed, nodded grimly. He worked with desperate speed, bypassing the damaged rig systems, readying the world breaker for manual detonation. He affixed a remote trigger to his gauntlet, his hands trembling slightly, knowing this was likely his last act. As they reached the edge of the crystalline vault, the sight that met their eyes was both terrifying and magnificent. The Citan shard, now pulsating with the raw power of a nascent star, was no longer merely a fragment. It had begun to coalesce, its obsidian form swelling, manifesting faint, geometric outlines of a colossal, vaguely humanoid shape, shimmering with emerald light. It was beginning to reform. A star god awakening from its long, terrible sleep, hungering for the galaxy. "Now, Votan, now," Tharn screamed, his voice raw with defiance. At that very moment, a blinding flash of pure, white energy erupted from the Golgoth Prime light years away, visible even through the intervening asteroid and void shields. It was the self-immolation of Ur-Kadrin's heart, a catastrophic overload of its core data looms, unleashed to create a single, focused, null pulse. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The emerald light from the Citan shard sputtered, flickering erratically, then dimmed, as if a colossal shadow had fallen over it. The pervasive psychic pressure vanished, replaced by a momentary, terrifying emptiness. The automated drones attacking the kin froze, their emerald eyes going dark, their metallic limbs seizing up. The asteroid's malevolent groan subsided, replaced by a shuddering silence. The shard was momentarily blind, deaf, and disconnected from its influence over the material world. This was their window. "Imgar, detonate!" Tharn bellowed, pointing his axe at the now vulnerable, flickering form of the awakening Citan. Imgar, tears streaming down his grimy face, slammed his fist onto the remote trigger on his gauntlet. "For the ancestors! For Ur-Kadrin!" A guttural hum emanated from the world-breaker geoseismic charge. Its grav reactor core glowed with an impossible contained fury. The colossal device, now standing at the very precipice of the crystalline vault, began to phase, its molecular structure destabilizing. It was drawing in every last erg of available energy, bending reality around it, preparing for a detonation on a truly cataclysmic scale. Tharn and the last Oathguard turned, sprinting away from the vault, knowing it was futile. The detonation wave would consume them within microseconds. But they ran, driven by instinct, and the unshakable will to survive, even as they accepted their doom. The Satan shard, sensing its impending annihilation, throbbed violently, its emerald light flaring in a final, desperate burst of power. It attempted to reassert its influence, but the Votan's null pulse, though temporary, held fast. The silence of the void screamed as the world breaker reached critical mass, with a flash that briefly outshone 1,000 suns. The world breaker geoseismic charge detonated. The Leviathan's rib, a void whale-sized asteroid, simply ceased to be. It didn't explode in a conventional sense. It imploded, collapsing in on itself with the force of a localized supernova, vaporizing rock, ice, and the nascent Satan shard within a microsecond. The resulting energy wave ripped through the void, momentarily scarring reality itself, a silent testament to the ultimate sacrifice of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin and its ancestor core. Kal Tharn and the last of the Oathguard were engulfed in the blinding light, their forms atomized before they could even register the shockwave. Their final act was one of desperate, self-sacrificing defiance, extinguishing an ancient terror with a final, furious act of will. The Catan shard was gone, utterly annihilated, and with it, the valiant, tragic hearts of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin. The void where the Leviathan's rib once drifted was now a turbulent maelstrom of superheated gas, shattered rock fragments, and ionizing radiation. The cataclysmic detonation of the world breaker geoseismic charge had not just destroyed the asteroid, it had scarred the very fabric of local space-time. The remnants of the Golgoth fleet, which had been positioned at what they believed was a safe distance, were crippled by the ensuing shockwave, their void shields flickering and failing, their hulls groaning under the impossible stresses. Of the tens of thousands of kin who had embarked on the Deep Maw expedition, fewer than 1,000 survived. These were primarily those aboard the outer rim of the fleet, or those in heavily shielded, non-essential craft, their lives saved by sheer chance and the immense, if temporary, sacrifice of their ancestor core. They floated in the shattered remains of their vessels, their world utterly undone, their purpose extinguished. The Golgoth Prime, once the proud flagship, was a hollow wreck. Its vast command bridge was depressurized, shattered debris floating in the zero-gravity environment. Kal Tharn and his Oathguard were gone, vaporized in the cataclysm. Their valiant sacrifice, a silent echo in the void. Brokir Imgar, too, had been consumed, his last act the detonation that saved them all. The true, horrifying aftermath, however, lay in the silence of Ur-Kadrin's heart. The ancestor, core, having performed its self-immolation to sever the shard's influence, was a lobotomized ghost. Its vast data looms, once humming with the accumulated wisdom of millennia, were now barren, wiped clean of all knowledge, all history, all identity. The self-inflicted damage was so profound that it retained only rudimentary operational protocols. Maintain basic life support, execute minimal navigation, preserve kin. Its voice, once a source of comfort and unwavering wisdom, was now a hollow echo, devoid of inflection, devoid of all purpose save the most fundamental. When the surviving kin attempted to interface with their Votan, they were met with a terrifying blankness. The wisdom of their ancestors was gone. The book of grudges, the records of their triumphs and defeats, the schematics for their advanced technology, all had been purged, sacrificed to break the Satan shard's insidious grasp. The data looms, once extensions of their intellect, were now little more than advanced, mindless calculating machines. The remaining kin were traumatized. They drifted through the debris-strewn void, their faces etched with horror, their eyes hollow. Their technology, once the bedrock of their existence, felt alien, unreliable. Without the Votan's guiding hand, basic repairs became arduous, navigation a terrifying gamble. The automated fabrication units, once so efficient, churned out erratic components, the subtle corruption of the shard having fundamentally altered their core programming. They were a people adrift, their technological prowess diminished, their faith in their Votan shattered. The physical scars were immense. Thousands of kin had perished, their ships destroyed. But the spiritual wound was far deeper. Their ancestor core, their sacred Votan, was gone, not in body, but in mind. It was a lobotomized guardian, a silent, empty presence that reminded them of their profound loss every waking moment. The kin of Ur-Kadrin had always been defined by their connection to their Votan, their collective memory and wisdom. Now, that connection was severed, leaving them with an aching void where their collective identity once resided. When contact was finally re-established with their fortress world, light years away, the news was received with a mixture of relief and profound despair. The planetary ancestor, Kor, having relied heavily on the Golgoth fleet's Votan for updates and coordination, had also suffered immense data corruption. While not entirely wiped clean, its wisdom was severely diminished, its core processes slowed, its access to long-term memory fragmented. It could offer little more than basic guidance, its vast intellect reduced to a functional but profoundly limited intelligence. The surviving kin, a mere fraction of their former strength, were forced to scavenge what they could from the wrecks. They pieced together life support modules, jury-rigged comms systems, and cobbled together enough thrusters to navigate the debris field. Their journey back to the fortress world was a grim, silent exodus, a testament to their shattered spirit. They were no longer the proud, self-assured kin of Ur-Kadrin, renowned for their deep void mining. They were the haunted survivors of a cosmic horror, their technological soul irrevocably broken. The cost of their ambition had been paid in full. The annihilation of their fleet, the obliteration of their Khal and his loyal Oath Guard, and the lobotomy of their beloved ancestor core. They had stopped the C'tan Shard, yes, but at a price that left them utterly undone, a ghost of their former glory. The grim dark of the galaxy had claimed another victim, leaving behind a scarred, traumatized remnant, forever marked by the silent influence of the star vampire and the ultimate sacrifice of their Votan. Their hearth light, though not extinguished, flickered precariously, a dim beacon in an endless night. The void-stained remnants of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin became a cautionary tale whispered across the stars, a grim legend of ambition and ultimate tragic cost. The returning survivors, a mere skeleton crew compared to the once mighty Golgoth fleet, limped back to their fortress world, their ships scarred, their spirit broken. They carried with them not glory or riches, but a profound, existential trauma. The fortress world of Ur-Kadrin, once a bustling hub of industry and innovation, was a muted, somber place. The planetary ancestor core, Ur-Kadrin's heart, continued its basic functions, but its vast memory banks, stripped of millennia of data, were an echoing void. It could maintain life support, manage resource allocation, and even offer rudimentary tactical advice, but the profound wisdom, the historical context, the very soul of the Votan was gone. Its communication was blunt, devoid of the intricate nuances that had once guided their civilization. It was a blank slate, forever bearing the invisible scars of the C'tan Shard. The surviving kin, known thereafter as the Silent Oath, for their grim, unspoken commitment to eternal vigilance, were forever changed. They were viewed with pity and suspicion by other kinholds, their very name synonymous with a catastrophe almost too great to comprehend. Their technological prowess, once their greatest pride, was severely diminished. Their data looms, though cleansed, operated with an inherent caution, a distrust of external influences that bordered on paranoia. Innovation became a slow, painstaking process, each new development scrutinized for any hint of the subtle corruption that had almost devoured them. The memory of Kal Tharn, Brokir Imgar, and the Oath Guard who made the ultimate sacrifice was preserved in a new, unwritten book of grudges, a ledger of profound sorrow and defiant resistance against an impossible foe. Their names were not celebrated with boisterous songs, but whispered in grim reverence, their sacrifice a constant reminder of the price of curiosity and unchecked ambition. They had died not just to destroy a Catan shard, but to sever the insidious connection, to ensure their kinhold would not become another weapon in a star god's arsenal. The kin of the silent oath rarely spoke of the Leviathan's rib, or the silent star. They knew the truth, a truth too terrifying to articulate. They had disturbed an ancient evil, a cosmic horror that transcended physical form, feeding on thought and information itself. And they had paid an almost unbearable price to put it back to sleep. Their wanderings through the void continued, but they were no longer driven by the boundless optimism of discovery. Instead, a grim, weary vigilance guided their course. They became experts in detecting the faintest energy signatures, the subtlest psychic distortions, forever searching for echoes of the horror they had faced, ready to flee, or if necessary, to sacrifice themselves again. Their ships, while functional, were always marked by their utilitarian, patched appearance, a constant reminder of their ordeal. The ancestor core, Ur-Kadrin's heart, a constant, unsettling presence, was both their salvation and their torment. Its hollow wisdom, its lack of historical memory, was a perpetual symbol of their loss. It guided them, yes, but it could no longer inspire them with tales of their glorious past. For that past had been sacrificed to save their future. It was a silent monument to a catastrophic event, a constant reminder that even the most advanced intellect could be undone by an alien will. The legacy of Kinhold Ur-Kadrin was not one of glory, but of grim, enduring survival against an impossible foe. They had faced a fragment of a star god and defeated it, but the victory left them hollowed out, forever scarred. They were the kin who had looked into the abyss and survived, but at the cost of their very identity. They carried the silent oath of vigilance, a promise to themselves and to the universe that they would never again be so blind, so trusting, so utterly undone by the deceptive glimmer of a silent star. Their name, once a symbol of ingenuity, now evoked a chill, a profound understanding of the terrible forces that lurked in the deep, dark void, forever reminding all who heard it of the dangers of unearthing what should remain buried, and the ultimate, tragic cost of such knowledge. Lore complete.